Hey guys. Tonight we slip quietly through the tall, creaking doors of a forgotten palace in early 18th century Spain. The floors are cold marble. The corridors echo with muffled footsteps on velvet rugs. And something else. Something musky. A thick, woolly scent wraps around your nose. Not quite mold. Not quite incense. More like old lace, marinated in soup stock and sweat. Welcome to the court of King Philip Va, man of silks, solemn prayer, and a stubborn refusal to bathe. You duck under a velvet rope, no alarms, it's fine, it's 1,720, and glide into a hallway lined with portraits. Dour noblemen stare you down, their powdered cheeks blooming like chalk roses, their wigs stacked like wedding cakes. It's a visual feast of gold trim and egos, but behind the pomp lies a stench, and no one seems to mind. The walls are thick with the perfume of centuria sandalwood, lavender, and an underlying current of royal perspiration that never quite left the upholstery. You pass a cluster of courtiers. They bow stiffly. Their faces are powdered to the point of ghosthood. You try not to breathe too deeply. You're in a place where body odor is not a problem, it's tradition. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere unexpected, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far our sleepy history travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing just outside the king's chambers. Two guards nod off beside the door. Their halberds tilt at gentle angles. Someone inside is mumbling. Is that Gregorian chant? Or is the king talking to his slippers again? The heavy oak door creaks open a little, just enough for you to peek in. The room is dim and sprawling. Walls draped in crimson velvet. Tapestries flapping gently like the sails of a lazy ship. The scent is stronger, here more concentrated. A mix of wax, mildew, old wool, and human ambition. And there he is, Philip V, grandson of the Sun King, draped in brocade and sulking beside a gold-framed bed the size of a small boat. His robe is embroidered, his cap is askew, and according to nearly every ambassador who ever met him, he smells like a neglected cupboard during monsoon season. You watch him rise, slowly, like a marionette that forgot it's being watched. He shuffles to a window, mutters something about enemies and angels, and tugs the curtain aside. The sunlight hits his face, and you swear you see a puff of dust rise from his collar. Now don't be too harsh. Philip isn't dirty in the peasant sense. He's not exactly digging ditches or milking goats. But bathing? Number. Not unless you count being lightly dabbed with rosewater by a trembling servant once every 6 months. You shift your gaze to the corner, where a golden basin sits untouched. Next to it, a perfectly folded towel. Still folded. Still perfect. Historians still argue whether the king used it in 1718 or just liked looking at it. The refusal to bathe isn't just personal, it's almost philosophical. Back then, people genuinely believed water could let in dangerous vapors, that pores opened like doors, and once they did, disease could march right in with its muddy boots and stay for dinner. One royal doctor even insisted that washing with water could dislodge the balance of humors, which is a medical way of saying, trust me, don't do it. You turn your head as the king calls for his valet. Not to bathe him, mind you. To powder his chest. The valet arrives with a silver puff the size of a pigeon. With an expert flick, he douses the king's collarbone in something that smells vaguely like talc, crushed daisies, and resignation. The valet's nose twitches, but his face remains impassive. You get the sense he's been suppressing his sense of smell for years. Possibly since childhood. Philip sighs. His fingers twitch. He's done with dressing for now. His next appointment isn't for another 2 hours. A whispery conversation with his own portrait. You slip out of the chamber and wander deeper into the palace. Everywhere, the air is perfumed, but not in a good way. It's what you'd get if you threw rose petals into a compost heap and prayed for the best. You pass the kitchen splattering with copper pans, spiced steam curling under the doors. Surely they smell better. You crack open a door. A wave of roasted meat and garlic hits you like a warm blanket. A chef yells something about pickled gooseberries. You smile. Some rooms are safe. Back in the hall, you notice portraits of past kings. Some grim, some grand. One looks suspiciously like he's holding his breath. There's Charles VIII, Habsburg king with a jawline that doubled as a genetic warning sign. He reportedly bathed even less than Philip, possibly only once in his life, and that was because he fell into a moat. And there's a little-known favorite of mine, Sancho I of Leon, called Sancho the Fat. His doctors thought his obesity was caused by evil air, so they banished him to a remote monastery where he lost weight by being nearly starved. Did he bathe during that exile? Probably not. Soap was expensive. And saints, they believed, didn't stink. Just mortals. You return to Philip's presence later in the evening. The king is sitting still, eyes glazed, muttering something about Frenchmen, fire, and fish. A priest beside him nods as though this makes perfect sense. No one dares mention soap, not the servants, not the queen, not even the doctor who once suggested a foot bath and was reassigned to the horse stables for a month. You wonder if the king's odor played a diplomatic role. Would enemies be thrown off by the musk? Did ambassadors cut meetings short to breathe freely again? Did treaties collapse under the pressure of breath-holding? Historians still debate whether Philip's aversion to hygiene was a symptom of deeper melancholy, possibly depression, or whether it was simply how monarchs rolled back then. After all, if you're chosen by God to rule, who are you to care what your armpits smell like? You yawn. The scent has settled into your clothes now. It's oddly comforting, like the dusty pages of an old book familiar. A little sour, but strangely cozy. You lean against the wall, eyes half closed, as the muffled court life continues. Rustling robes, muttered prayers, distant music from a court musician plucking a lute with tired fingers. Outside, the sun dips lower. The air grows cooler, but inside this palace, the warmth of centuries clings stubbornly to every fabric, every drapery, and every inch of unwashed skin. You're not just watching history anymore. You're inhaling it. You don't wake up in a traditional sense. You sort of drift forward, still drowsy, still wrapped in the scent of incense and ancient upholstery. The palace doesn't get louder, just more detailed. You begin to notice things you didn't catch earlier. A tapestry stitched with scenes of lions wearing crowns. A cracked ceramic vase holding a single dried rose. And behind the velvet curtain, a cat licking itself clean. Irony. The court remains respectfully oblivious to your quiet presence, which is good, because you're about to get quite personal with the man behind the musk king Philip V of Spain. Your nostrils twitch. You follow the scent trail not just through the palace, but through the story of his life. Born in 1683, Philip was the grandson of none other than Louis XIV, the famously fabulous Sunday King of France. You'd expect royal grooming standards to run in the family, but let's just say Philip didn't inherit the lavender obsession. He did, however, get the title Duke of Anjou, and eventually, Spain itself. Imagine being plucked from Versailles where mirrors glittered, fountains danced, and people powdered their wigs 3 times a day and dropped into a crumbling Spanish empire in need of a king. That was Philip's reality in 1700, when he was crowned at age 17. He probably hadn't even unpacked his perfume bottles yet. You follow him now through that transition. He's standing in a sunlit hallway, one hand gripping a letter from his grandfather. His wig is slightly crooked, and his shoes are buckled a little too tightly. He looks like he's trying very hard not to cry. The War of Spanish Succession has just begun. Europe is arguing loudly about whether this boy should inherit Spain or whether doing so will tip the entire continent into chaos. Spoiler: it does. Spain becomes a hotbed of diplomatic drama, and Felipe, a teenager, becomes its slightly disheveled protagonist. Here's the kicker. The stress does something to him. Something inside unravels a little. He starts to withdraw, even as he rules. He talks less. He fidgets more. And he begins what historians later call his private decline. That's right. The man stopped bathing during wartime. Some blame depression. Others said it was a mystical turn inward, a form of royal asceticism. One French diplomat muttered in a letter, "His Majesty has taken to smelling of damp velvet and fried onion." A little dramatic, but he wasn't entirely wrong. You follow Philip into his new daily rhythm. Mornings begin not with bathing, but with long, meandering conversations with God. He whispers prayers while a servant trims his mustache. He refuses breakfast most days, except for a little sugared wine and maybe a biscuit if the Queen insists. The Queen, by the way, is trying her best. Maria Luisa of Savoy, just 16 when she married him, often acted more like a nurse than a bride. She tried to coax him into clean habits, offering lavender-scented towels and lemon oil foot scrubs. No dice. The king responded with silence. Or, occasionally, by hiding under his bed. Yes, that actually happened. You pause at the doorway of his private chapel. It's small, solemn, and true to themia, bit musty. Philip spends hours here, not bathing, not changing clothes, just praying and mumbling. His courtiers say nothing. They just open windows and try to survive. You watch him move to the music room next, where a small orchestra is assembled. They begin a slow sonata. It's the same song every afternoon. He nods along, fingers tapping. He doesn't speak, but you can tell he's listening. Music was one of the few things that soothed him. Well, that and avoiding soap. Let's talk hygiene, or the royal lack thereof. Philip didn't just avoid bathing himself, he also hated being around water in general. The royal fountains were left dry. The palace bathhouse sat unused, its marble basins dusty and echoing. A few brave advisors suggested soaking in warm wine instead. One even offered donkey milk. The king shook his head. His logic? If saints didn't need to bathe, neither did he. Historians still argue whether this was due to superstition, mental illness, or a sincere belief that bathing would disrupt his internal harmony. One thing's clear. He didn't do it. Not for weeks. Not for months. At one point, not for 3 straight years. That's where you are now, deep in those years. You follow him through a midwinter day. The windows rattle with wind. Courtiers wear gloves indoors. But the king remains swaddled in his thick velvet robes. Unwashed, unbothered. His skin glistens with natural oils. His hair, what remains of itis, curled into disobedient whirls. You can't help but notice a faint dusting of breadcrumbs on his lapel. No one brushes them off. During meals, the court performs an elegant dance of avoidance. People sit far from him, but not so far as to seem disrespectful. Conversation flows in a polite semicircle around the smell. Occasionally, someone coughs, but no one ever says anything, except, perhaps, the queen again. You catch her once, whispering to a maid in French. Perhaps, if we tell him it's a holy bath, he'll accept. The maid nods with the haunted eyes of someone who has tried every holy trick in the book. One evening, during a state dinner, a visiting diplomat nearly faints. He claims the candles were too smoky. More likely, it was the king's lapdog, who, though perfumed regularly, slept in the king's bed and probably bore the full sensory burden. Even the palace dogs seem resigned. You pet one behind the ear, it winks at you, as if to say, "At least he doesn't make us bathe either." Amid all this, Philip continues to rule. Sort of. He signs decrees. He makes decisions. But his grip on reality is loosening. You see it in the way he talks to his reflection, in the way he insists that clocks are whispering secrets. Once, he even refuses to be dressed, claiming clothes are foreign ambassadors sent to spy. That's one of those lines historians highlight with bold ink. And still no soap, no water, not even a sponge. You follow him into another sleepless night. The bedchamber smells like wool, incense, and something vaguely nutty. The king tosses, murmurs prayers, and eventually begins singing. His voice is soft, tuneless, but strangely beautiful. The guards outside shift nervously. This is normal, apparently, and somewhere between verses you start to drift. Your eyelids grow heavy. The king's strange lullaby fades into background hum. The velvet walls seem to pulse gently with warmth. You let yourself sink deeper into the folds of this royal mess, this fragrant fugue of history, and find against all odds a kind of peace. Because yes, he refused to bathe. But somehow, the kingdom didn't collapse. The world spun on. Treaties were signed. Babies were born. And Philip, in his own greasy, bewildered way, kept going. And so do you. You're still floating in the palace, but time's a little fuzzy now. The days blur together, like fogged windows in the morning. Philip's schedule is repetitive, unchanging, so much so that even the staff begin referring to events as the noon lament or the 3 o'clock hallway shuffle. And you've settled into your role as a silent observer, drifting gently through each scene like a ghost with front-row tickets to the world's strangest routine. It's morning again, probably. The shutters are still drawn, but you hear the soft clink of a silver breakfast tray and the rustle of stiff brocade as a valet, eyes half shut, arranges it on a low table. This is not breakfast as you know it. There are no eggs, no fruit, just a warm goblet of sweet wine and a biscuit that's more ceremonial than edible. Philip stirs under a blanket of damask. He doesn't speak. His eyes flutter open like he's just returned from a 400-year dream. He sits up slowly, a tangle of unbrushed hair escaping from beneath his cap. The odor in the room is, well, familiar by now. You've learned to live with it. It's less of a smell and more of a presence, like another advisor, always lingering. You follow him through his morning routine, which is generous to call a routine. There's no washing, of course. Not even a token splash of rosewater today. He refuses to change his robe. A servant holds up a freshly pressed alternative sky blue velvet, embroidered with tiny sun sand. The king squints at it like it just insulted his mother. He waves it away. You wander into his closet after he's gone, just to see. Dozens of robes, jackets, and stockings hang neatly, all of them untouched. They smell faintly of cedar, mothballs, and optimism. One even has a tag sewn into the collar for royal spring use. It's never been worn. Philip doesn't seem to care much about seasons or anything external. His world is internal, foggy, and slow-moving. He spends hours sitting in silence, sometimes praying, sometimes humming. Occasionally, he recites entire operas, changing voices for every character. The courtiers pretend not to notice. You, on the other hand, are captivated. He's halfway through an aria now, playing the heroine and the villain with equal flair, never once stumbling over lyrics. That's the thing he may not bathe. But his memory is sharp. He remembers verses, treaties, bloodlines, and court scandals from 2 decades ago. Just don't ask him what day it is. You trail him into his council chamber, where officials gather in a semicircle, ready to read aloud reports. The king nods politely. Doesn't blink. Doesn't move. One minister pauses mid-sentence to swat at an insect. Philip frowns. Let it be, he says. It's only a soul in disguise. The room goes silent. The fly buzzes on. Historians still argue whether this was poetry, madness, or an elaborate way of avoiding tax reform. In the far corner, a court artist sketches quietly. You peek over his shoulder. It's the king regal, calm and curiously, glowing with cleanliness. You raise an eyebrow. The artist shrugs and whispers, if I drew him as he actually looked, the painting would never leave the archives. Even in stillness, the king dominates the space. He speaks little, but his presence is weighty both spiritually and, well, olfactorily. The guards nearest his chair rotate weakly, reportedly due to nostril fatigue. One young scribe once fainted and was revived with strong vinegar. They now keep a flask of it in every room, just in case. Still, it's not all gloom and miasma. There are moments of gentleness, too. You watch him stroke the ears of a floppy-eared hound named Matteo. The dog rests its chin on Philip's foot. You swear you see the king smile. Briefly, almost imperceptibly. But it's there. Then there's the garden. Ah, the garden. He doesn't walk Ives, not a fan of open spaces. But he likes to sit by the window and watch it. You find a seat beside him, careful not to disturb the worn cushion or the loose pile of songbooks on the floor. Below, royal gardeners trim rosebushes, rake gravel paths, and wave discreetly at the window when they think he's looking. He waves back. Sometimes, when he's in a good mood, that window becomes his stage. He orchestrates silent drama spoining, whispering, chuckling to himself. Once, you catch him pretending to conduct the bird song outside. You'd laugh if it weren't so oddly touching. Back inside, his palace remains a living paradox. It sparkles and it reeks. You pass a chandelier cleaned to within an inch of its crystal life. Beneath it stands a footman discreetly dabbing cologne under his ears, probably as a defense mechanism. There's lemon water in the kitchens, scented gloves in the dressing rooms, and bowls of fresh lavender set out weekly in the main halls. And yet, none of it can quite mask the royal ambiance. You overhear a maid sighing. He's the only man who can make sandalwood smell like sadness. Another one nods, dropping crushed mint leaves onto the floor before the king's next walk, hoping they'll crunch just enough to lift the mood. You begin to appreciate the quiet rebellion happening in this place. No one can force the king to bathe. So the staff finds little ways to rebel. Lemon peels tucked into cushions. Rosewater spritzed into his shoes. One even tries sewing sachets of lavender into his robe lining. That one doesn't end well. Philip senses the intrusion and demands the robe be burned. The ghosts are hiding in the seams. He mutters. He's not paranoid. He's just sensitive. There's one courtier, the Marquis de Alba, who becomes a sort of unofficial royal mood translator. You see him every morning, checking the king's posture, tone, and breathing. Today's a vanilla, scented silence. He whispers, "Safe to proceed." The ministers nod. Still, the kingdom holds. Despite it, all despite the reek, the rituals, the sighing, staff Spain functions. Ships sail, corn is taxed, priests hold mass, peasants gossip. The empire doesn't implode. Not yet. Anyway. And you? You're strangely at peace. You've adjusted to the rhythm, the scent, the quiet peculiarities of a man who ruled not by speeches or shows of strength, but by simply continuing to exist in a stubborn, fragrant fog. As the day winds down, you watch him sit by the window again. The sun casts soft light over his shoulder. He looks old now, though he's not yet 40. Tired. Yes. But calm, at least for the moment. His fingers tap softly on the windowsill. The music in his mind is back, and as he hums the faintest melody just barely off key, you feel yourself sink a little deeper into this strange, scented dream of history. You find yourself, once again, standing just behind the heavy velvet curtain of time, peeking into another morning in King Philip V's eternal palace of fog, whispers, and unwashed royalty. It's a quieter day than usual. A clock somewhere chimes 11. But the king hasn't emerged. Servants whisper in the hall, unsure whether to knock or to wait. His valet, the long-suffering Sebastian, shifts from one foot to the other, clutching a fresh robe he knows won't be worn. This one is ivory satin, embroidered with silver thread, and it smells faintly of orange blossoms. You already know how this ends. He won't wear it. He won't wash. Again. But today a new player enters the scene. The royal physician, Dr. Juan de Olivares. Tall, bony, and eternally squinting, arrives with a leather-bound journal and a look of academic exasperation. He's come to try, once more, to convince the king that water isn't out to assassinate him. You trail behind the doctor as he walks into the royal chamber, nose twitching at the now familiar musk of His Majesty's sanctuary. Philip is reclining in a wingback chair, robe loosely tied, slippers hanging from his toes like forgotten punctuation marks. He nods absently as the doctor launches into a long, slow lecture on humors, miasmas, and the benefits of tepid application of the sponge. Philip closes his eyes. The water opens the skin. The spirits escape. A pause. "You said that yesterday," says the doctor, pinching the bridge of his nose. And he had. He says it often. It's his favorite line, repeated with the calm certainty of a man who genuinely believes he'll die if bathed. To be fair, he's not the only one. In early 18th century Europe, the idea that bathing could be dangerous was still going strong. Bathhouses had fallen out of fashion in the previous centuries, thanks in part to plague fears, bad plumbing, and a general sense that soap was more luxury than necessity. The church also played a part promoting the idea that bodily purity had nothing to do with water and everything to do with prayer. So Philip wasn't seen as entirely mad, at least, not for his bathing choices. You sit beside a tapestry in the chamber and listen to Dr. Olivares try a different tactic. "What if we used wine instead of water?" the doctor suggests, tone hopeful. Philip opens one eye. "Red or white?" The doctor blinks. "Diluted white." Philip frowns. "Too acidic." End of discussion. You slip out of the room with the doctor, who mutters something about writing a treatise on the unbaptized skin of His Majesty. You would read it. Outside in the hall, the Queen appears. Maria Luisa, patient as ever, offers the doctor a look that says, "Tried that. Didn't work. Thanks for playing." She looks tired today. Her hands are clasped at her waist, fingers stained faintly with ink. You've learned that she spends her nights writing letters, mostly requests to foreign doctors, cousins, and Jesuit advisors for gentle remedies. Anything to nudge her husband toward health, toward clarity, toward soap. You follow her down the corridor, her skirts brushing against cedarwood paneling. She pauses at a table, picks up a vial of rosewater, and sighs deeply before setting it back down. Perhaps, she whispers to herself, if we sprinkled it while he slept. It won't work. You both know it. Later that day, you find yourself in the physician's study, tucked away in a back corner of the palace. Bookshelves sag with the weight of dusty tomes. Some titles catch your eye. Philosophiae, Naturalis Odorata, The Balance of Moistures, Essays on Vapors, in Melancholy. A few are bound in cracked red leather, labeled only Privado. You leaf through one. A catalogue of royal health anomalies. One entry reads, April 1714. Refused to open window for 19 days. Claimed the light carried French poison. Another notes, July 1715. Complained that silence was too loud, and in bold underlining, bathing proposal rejected. Again, historians still debate whether Philip's extreme aversion to bathing was part of a larger mental disorder. Some point to melancholia, a historical catch, all for depression and anxiety. Others argue he showed signs of what we might today label bipolar disorder or even paranoid schizophrenia. But here's the twist. No one dared diagnose him outright. He was the king. He might not have bathed, but he still ruled armies, approved laws, and appointed bishops. You had to tiptoe around the truth even if the truth smelled a little ripe. You step back out into the palace corridors. The scent of herbs wafts from a nearby chamber. A small apothecary has been set up near the chapel. Shelves of dried mint, rosemary, and lavender line the walls. You see a servant drop handfuls into small linen bag-sherbal sachets. These will be tucked into the king's pillows and cuffs. Subtle improvements, she whispers. So he doesn't know. You pass a priest lighting incense, another olfactory intervention. It's all part of the campaign. Operation Mask the Monarch. It's oddly endearing. The staff isn't cruel. They don't mock him. They try, in small ways, to help. A drop of citrus oil here, a scented glove there, a fresh cushion rotated in at night, a silent war against scent, and still, the king persists. He sits at the window again, watching the sun drift lower. A blanket across his knees, a book open on his lap. Not reading, just holding it. It's enough. You take a seat beside him, well, not too close, and let your gaze follow his to the gardens. The orange trees sway. Distant laughter floats up from the servants' quarters. A lute plays somewhere, off-key but earnest. Then he speaks. They think I can't smell it, he murmurs. But I can. It follows me. You hold your breath. Is he talking about the palace? The scent? His own skin? Number. Something deeper. You realize this isn't about odor at all. It's about control. Bathing meant vulnerability. Letting others touch you, see you bare, feel the temperature on your skin. For a man losing his grip on reality, clinging to routine, skipping baths wasn't laziness. It was armor. And suddenly, it makes sense. It's not that he refused to be clean. He refused to be opened. As night falls, you feel the palace settle. The flicker of candlelight grows soft. The guards whisper lower. Even the dogs lie down without a sound. And the king? He stays by the window. Silent. Still. Regal. In his own fragrant way, you drift backward through the velvet halls, past sachets and tapestries, through silence and whispers, until you find yourself at the edge of sleep. Not quite awake, not quite gone, just lingering in the warm, strange breath of history. Somehow, in this place where the clocks all tick differently, and the air carries the secrets of powdered men and perfumed curtains, you find yourself rising into yet another royal morning. The scent is, well, no longer surprising. You've passed the stage of judgment, moved through irony, and landed firmly in acceptance. You're not sure if that's comforting or concerning. This morning begins with a prayer. Not the whispered kind, but a full-throated Latin chant echoing down the halls. You follow the sound to a private oratory just off the king's chambers. Philip V is kneeling barefoot, his robe pooling around him like a wilted tapestry. He's not looking at the crucifix. His eyes are shut. His lips move faster than the priest's. You ease into the shadows beside a marble column and watch as the priest tries to guide him back to the proper verse. The king doesn't follow. He's praying to something else's own rhythm, his own melody. The scent of incense does its best to cover the room, but it's a half-hearted attempt. You've learned that nothing quite competes with the perfume of royal inertia. Once the ritual ends, the king retreats not to the gardens, not to breakfast, but to his dressing room. Don't get excited. Dressing is generous. It's more of a ritual of resisting change. A servant lays out fresh linen. The king frowns. New? He asks, as if the very idea offends. It is. Only lightly new, Your Majesty. The valet replies. A master of diplomatic phrasing. The king allows it, barely. He permits the cloth to touch his wrists, but not his neck. Never the neck. That's where the invisible illnesses settle, he insists. You drift closer and notice the thick chalk line around his collar, an invisible moat. His armor against the unknown. Then come the wigs. Ah, yes, the wigs. Today's selection includes one with soft curls, another with loose waves, and a third that looks like it's seen battle. He picks the last one. It smells like beeswax and anxiety. You follow as he steps into the hallway. The courtiers line up, powdered, primped, and trying very hard not to breathe through their noses. One man discreetly holds a handkerchief scented with clove beneath his lip. Philip stops, looks directly at him. Cold? The king asks, deadpan. The courtier nods, terrified. Good. Stay warm. The king moves on. Once again, you're reminded that he's far more aware than he lets on. The day unfolds slowly. First, an audience with two foreign envoys. They arrive dressed in crisp silks and stiff posture. One is from Naples, the other from a small Dutch province trying to renegotiate shipping rights. Both are visibly struggling to maintain their composure. You watch beads of sweat form on the Dutchman's temple. Not from nerves, from air quality. Philip listens quietly, nods once, and responds with a single sentence in French. The translators scribble frantically. The meeting lasts 17 minutes. One of the shortest in royal history. Later, in a side hall, the envoys gasp fresh air and mutter to each other. I swear the curtains were alive, one says. They were not, the other replies. That was the smell. You trail them for a bit, out of amusement. Then return to the king's side as he settles into one of his favorite pastimes. Not doing anything. There's an art to it. He sits by the long window, legs wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. A tray with an untouched biscuit sits nearby. A cat curls at his feet. The air is quiet but dense, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Only this one has lasted 3 years and smells of old wool. Suddenly, a servant bursts in. Your Majesty, opera performers have arrived. Philip doesn't blink, but his fingers twitch. You follow the procession into the private theater, a gilded chamber barely big enough for 20 chairs. The performers enter singers, musicians, and one very nervous harpsichordist. They bow deeply, and the performance begins. Now here's where everything changes. As soon as the music begins, so does Philip. He perks up, his lips twitch with the beat, his head moves in tiny arcs. The courtiers pretend not to notice, but everyone sees it. The king is alive here. He hums under his breath, whispers lines from memory, even conducts the final aria with one hand, waving like a solemn conductor, trying not to knock over a candle. You wonder, how can a man so isolated, so withdrawn, know every note, every pause? Historians still argue whether music was his only true connection to the world, or simply a safe place where no one expected him to be clean, coherent, or kingly. Here, he could just be Philip, the boy from Versailles, the grandson of Louis XIV, the sad-eyed prince who got handed a crumbling empire and never figured out what to do with it. You catch a detail: a servant lighting a small pot of perfumed oil at the back of the theater. Clever. It helps, marginally. After the performance, the king claps once. Just once. Everyone bows again. The court returns to its careful choreography. And Philip? He wanders. You follow him through the hall of mirrors, where sunlight dances off cracked glass. His reflection is everywhere. Dozens of versions of himself, some regal, some slouching, all surrounded by faint, ghostly halos of grime. You pause at one mirror, where a smudge, perhaps forehead-shaped, suggests he leaned here yesterday. Maybe thinking. Maybe dozing. And still, no one says a word. Not the courtiers. Not the priests. Not even the queen, who passes with a nod and a lavender sachet tucked into her sleeve like a secret weapon. You walk alongside her for a moment. She whispers, "We keep the windows open when he sleeps. The air helps." Then, quieter. "I burn his robes in the garden, one at a time. He never notices." You look at her. A teenage bride turned caretaker. A queen of quiet resistance. She smiles faintly. "He's still the king," she says, "even if he smells like the inside of a boiled glove." Night falls softly. You follow the king back to his chambers. He doesn't speak. He doesn't change. He lies down in the same robe, on the same sheets, with the same dog at his feet. The dog sighs. So do you. Outside, the fountains trickle in the moonlight. Inside, the scent settles like a blanket over the room. And as you watch him fall asleep, pun-washed, undisturbed, and inexplicably dignified, you realize something strange. He's not broken. He's just stubborn. And in his own fragrant way, he's found peace. Morning in the royal palace doesn't arrive with sunlight. Not really. The thick, embroidered curtains keep most of that out. Instead, daybreak makes itself known through the muffled sounds of slippers on marble, chambermaids whispering in corners, and of course the ceremonial plodding of the king's valet as he approaches the sleeping quarters with what must be the most defeated optimism in Europe. You're already in the corner of the room when Sebastian arrives, gently clearing his throat as if to warn the furniture. In his arms, the usual robe option, rejected yesterday, a small brush and a bottle of scented vinegar that he now carries for morale more than function. King Philip V stirs. Sort of. He opens one eye, squints, and groans like a man who's just been asked to explain how mirrors work. Which, knowing Philip, wouldn't be far from his morning routine. Sebastian Bosch. "A fine morning, Your Majesty." Philip grumbles something in Old Spanish, possibly a prayer, possibly a curse. The dog at the foot of the bed Medio stretches, yawns, and shifts into a patch of light, as if to say, "Well, I tried." You remain still, watching this dance unfold once again. The valet offers the robe. The king sniffs the air, not the robe itself, just the air around it, and shakes his head. Number, that one's been touched by the French. Sebastian nods solemnly and retreats. No robe, no grooming, no bath. It's as if the king is allergic to change itself. And, in some ways, he is. Because today, just as yesterday, and the countless mornings before it, there will be no soap, no water, no towel ever so slightly warmed by the hearth. And yet, here's the twist. Philip's wardrobe is immaculate. You follow the valet down the hallway to the laundry roomies. Even unbathed kings have laundry and discover an entire operation dedicated to caring for garments His Majesty rarely wears. Robes, waistcoats, ruffles, gloves, cravats, slippers lined with fur, all pressed, stored, and untouched. One maid mutters, "The robe we wash most is the one he stared at for 4 hours last week." You nod in admiration. It's a quiet devotion. The king might not cleanse himself, but his environment is polished to defiant perfection. You drift back to the king's side as he makes his slow journey to the chapel. He walks alone today, without fanfare, wrapped in a robe that looks suspiciously like the one he wore 3 days ago. The scent is evolving, not worsening, necessarily just transforming. Something between old honey and damp parchment. Maybe a hint of camphor. Along the corridor, portraits of saints and ancestors line the walls, each one more judgmental than the last. You half expect one of them to wrinkle their painted noses. At chapel, Philip kneels, silent and still. The priest begins the Mass. You sit on a low bench near the door, letting the incense cloud around you like some medieval vapor bath. It almost works. Almost. After Mass, the king requests his astrologer. Yes, his astrologer. You'd forgotten about that part of court life. The man arrives in a plume of sage smoke, clutching charts, scrolls, and what appears to be a petrified lizard on a chain. He bows so deeply, you wonder if he'll get back up. "My stars tell me," he begins, "that today is auspicious for cleansing rituals." You raise an eyebrow. Bold move. The king frowns. Cleansing? Not bodily. The astrologer hurries. Celestial. A purification of the air. With herbs. No touching. No wetness. Only burning sage and reciting the moons. The king relaxes. Yes, the moons are clean. And so begins the air purification ritual. A pageant of burning herbs and muttered Latin that fills the chamber with a scent you can only describe as mystical fireplace. It's a win. Kind of. At least it smells less like wet velvet in here now. Later, the astrologer leaves, bowing so low he nearly sweeps the floor. Philip nods approvingly and returns to his seat by the window, watching the clouds. Occasionally, he whispers, "The stars are turning again." You take a walk through the palace while the king communes with the sky. It's quieter than usual. Courtiers have scattered to corners. A few are in the library, reading poetry aloud with clipped diction. Others sip diluted wine and debate how many days it's been since the king last wore anything new. One claims to have a log. In the music room, you find a harpsichord tuner hard at work. "I tune it weekly," he says. The king never plays it, but he says it listens better when it's in tune. You're not sure what that means, but you nod. In this world, it makes perfect sense. There's something poetic about a king who refuses to bathe, yet insists his instruments be kept in top shape. Outside, in the palace stables, the groomsmen are grooming the horses. Lavishly. Shampoo. Brushes. Mane detanglers. One even has a scented oil he applies to the lead stallion's forehead. For luck. The horses smell better than half the court, one groom quips. That's generous, says another. Back inside, you return just in time for the daily audience. Nobles line up along the long carpeted hall, each ready to bow and deliver a request, a report, or a gift. One offers figs. Another presents a tapestry. The third, a small box containing a soapstone, carving from the Indies. Philip eyes it suspiciously. What is it? He asks. Soapstone, sire, the noble says. The king freezes. Why would I want stone made of soap? A long pause. The noble stammers something about carvings and culture and Eastern artisanship. The box is quietly withdrawn. That's the thing about Philip, he's not unaware. He's not oblivious. He simply redefines what matters. Sanitation, unimportant. Wigs, vital. Moon positions, essential. Whether his dog got 3 kisses goodnight, mandatory. By evening, he's back in his chambers, sprawled on a brocade chaise, talking softly to an open book of psalms. It's unclear whether he's reading or responding. But the dog, again, is at his side. Matteo licks his paw, glances at the king, and whines softly. You get the sense the dog knows. He understands. This strange man, this stubborn soul wrapped in velvet and superstition, is his human, and he'll sit beside him, smell and all, until the world turns upside down. You sit too, because honestly, the scent doesn't matter anymore. Not really. What you've come to understand is that Philip V is a portrait of contradiction, half monarch, half mystic, part emperor, part exile in his own mind. And even if his skin never touches soap again, he remains the axis around which this strange, perfumed world turns. So you breathe it in deep, slow, soft, because history, like this chamber, is not always fragrant, but it is always fascinating. You wake or perhaps just drift upward into another layer of palace life. This time, the air feels heavier, still warm with candle wax and velvet dust, but now tinged with something more elusive, tension. There's a silence running under everything this morning. Not the usual solemn quiet of an overly polite court, but something different. The type of silence people use when they're avoiding a subject too large or too odd to name directly. It starts with the way the guards avoid eye contact, the way the pages whisper instead of speaking, and the way the royal physician walks a little too quickly down the hall, clutching a velvet pouch as if it holds secrets better left sealed. Today, the king's melancholy has flared up again. He's not in his chamber, or chapel, or even his favorite chair by the east window. He's in the salon, the largest, most echo-filled room in the palace. And he is, at this very moment, conversing with a chair. You walk in cautiously, barefoot on the polished floor, and hear it for yourself. I've told you, he says firmly to the chair. You may approach me only through proper channels. A pause. He nods to himself. Good. Then, we understand each other. The chair, for the record, remains silent. The courtiers hover in the doorway, unsure what's worse, interrupting or watching. One brave advisor steps forward with a prepared note about trade routes. Philip glances at him, frowns and mutters, You weren't invited to the chair's audience. He's sent away, and no one argues. Because at this point, this is simply Tuesday. You find a soft patch of carpet and sit, letting the scene unfold like a slow, dreamlike painting. The king, hair uncombed, still in yesterday's robe, possibly the day before's, too, sits regally beside the empty chair he's just reprimanded. The air around him has thickened to something that could probably be bottled and sold as Ode de Bourbon, the brooding years. Historians still argue whether Philip's mental decline began with grief, genetics, or the crushing pressure of ruling an empire that was, frankly, falling apart. Some cite his deep depression after the death of Queen Maria Louisa in 1714. Others note his family's long, proud tradition of emotional instability. Either way, by the 1720s, He had become what polite nobles whispered as unpredictable. You, however, are getting the full tour of unpredictability. Take, for instance, the day he refused to eat for 3 days not out of protest, but because he believed swallowing would trap ghosts in his throat. Or the time he spent 4 consecutive nights reciting psalms to his own reflection in a silver plate. Not a mirror, a plate. You walk with him later as he paces the corridor, mumbling about France, about destiny, about the dog that listens better than the bishops. Matteo trots at his side, loyal and dignified, like a furry minister of state. He stops, suddenly. "Do you feel it?" he asks no one in particular. You freeze. "The pull," he continues, "the gravity of the floor. It's stronger in this hallway. It keeps me here, keeps us all here." Then he walks on. No one questions it. Back in his chambers, a group of courtiers gather to whisper. "He's been worse since the comet," one says. "It passed weeks ago," another replies. "He still feels it." The first insists. There's a general nod of agreement. It's not entirely superstition. This was an era when celestial events and earthly health were still deeply intertwined. Comets brought bad air, and bad air brought bad humors. And bad humors? Well, those made kings talk to chairs and smell like overripe wallpaper. But there's more going on than just melancholy. Today, for the first time, someone tries to intervene. A new physician, young, French, 2 idealisticas arrived with a plan. He approaches the king with a basin of warm water, a bar of imported soap, and a very naive smile. You watch it all unfold in slow motion. Philip eyes the soap. He leans forward, sniffs, then recoils like it's venom. "You bring poison wrapped in citrus," he declares. The basin is whisked away. The Frenchman is never seen again. The court makes a collective note. No more soap. Ever. But don't be fooled into thinking it's all delusion and damp robes. Philip still rules. Even in his eccentricity, even while muttering to upholstery, he remains the king. He signs edicts, appoints bishops, writes letters, with some spelling errors, granted, and, perhaps most interestingly, composes music. Yes, music. He's been working on a new composition, an odd, wandering melody inspired by the wind and, you're not making this up, the sound of Matteo scratching behind his ears. He hums it often, sometimes whistling through his teeth. He even asks the court musicians to play it, though no one's quite sure of the key. You listen one evening as he leads a half-dozen musicians in an impromptu performance. It starts off promising, then drifts, then soars, then collapses in a strange flurry of trills and unfinished chords. And still he claps. Once. The musicians bow deeply, sweating. "I like it," he says. "It smells right." You try not to laugh. It would feel rude. Instead, you sit quietly, appreciating that even a king who refuses to bathe can still be touched by beauty. Even if he insists it has to smell right before it sounds good. Later, back in the corridor, you pass a statue of Saint Sebastian. Someone has draped a perfumed handkerchief over its shoulder. A silent prayer? A passive-aggressive hint? You're not sure. Down the hall, you find the Queen's old chamber. Dusty now. Quiet. She's been gone several years. But her scent lavender and something sharper, maybe nerala still, lingers faintly in the fabrics. You wonder if Philip ever comes here. If he remembers. If that scent is the only one he ever missed. You sit by the window, staring out over the gardens. The moonlight glows on orange blossoms. The fountains sparkle, and far below the king stands alone, muttering to the night air, barefoot in the grass. Maybe he's lost. Maybe he's dreaming. Or maybe, just maybe, he's free in his own strange way from the rules of normal life. You let your eyes close. The scent of incense drifts through the window, and once again the king's melody returns. soft and strange, and just a little floral. It's past midnight, though the clocks in the palace don't all agree. One chimes once, another twice, and the one just outside the king's chamber hasn't worked since the comet passed. Time, in Philip V's court, is more a suggestion than a rule, much like the etiquette around bathing. Tonight, the palace feels especially still. Even the mice are whispering. You wander slowly, barefoot on ancient carpets, past darkened portraits and flower vases that haven't held flowers in years. In the shadows, things seem to breathe. The velvet, the curtains, even the wallpaper. Everything here holds memories, including smells. And tonight, the smell is different. You notice it as soon as you enter the west corridor. A sharp, clean scent. Lemon, clove, maybe even mint. It's shocking, intrusive, like someone shouted in a library. You stop, inhale, and follow it. Down the hall you find a maid in a panic. She's holding a cloth and a small bottle. "It's not my fault," she says, eyes wide. "I only meant to wipe the chair arms. They were sticky again." Sticky? She doesn't elaborate. But you know, the king's hands. Always slightly damp from who knows what. Not sweat exactly. Not oils. Just Philipness. The maid's error? She used vinegar mixed with lemon to clean the armrests of the king's favorite prayer chair. And now, the king has locked himself in his dressing room. You tiptoe closer and press your ear gently to the door. From within comes a steady stream of muttering. The acids. The poisons. They sent citrus spirits to unravel my soul. This may be a bit dramatic, but not entirely unexpected. What's new, however, is the sudden emergence of a theory among the staff, the soap conspiracy. It began, apparently, as a joke among the younger servants. He thinks soap is a political plot. But then the idea grew legs. They say the king once declared a bar of scented soap a French agent. They say he once accused a bottle of lavender oil of spying on him in the night. They say he believes certain herbs, basil, in particular, are aligned with the wrong stars. You can't confirm all of this, of course. But you do know that any time someone brings anything fragrant near him, he grows suspicious. So perhaps it's not a fear of bathing, but a fear of infiltration. You sit quietly in the next room as the queen's former chambermaid recounts her tale. "Once," she whispers, "I tried to clean his nightshirt while he slept, replaced it with an identical one, brushed his collar with rose oil. And, you ask, he woke before dawn, accused the painting in the corner of blinking too much, burned the nightshirt in the fireplace, didn't speak to anyone for a week." You nod. That tracks. You return to the dressing room door. Still locked. The muttering continues, now mixed with soft humming. Perhaps one of his strange, half-finished operas again. Eventually the door creaks open. The king steps out, unbathed, unchanged, but composed. He glances at the maid. "You will not use citrus again," he says quietly. "No, your majesté." He walks past her. That's it. No shouting. No punishment. Just a reminder. He's watching. You follow him to the chapel, where he insists on sitting on a stool today. The chair is compromised, he explains. The priest nods, carefully lighting incense to reclaim the air. The court, meanwhile, continues whispering about the soap conspiracy. One theory suggests the French sent perfumed gloves laced with madness. Another insists the Austrians invented a kind of olfactory confusion potion hidden in rosewater. One servant jokes, quietly, that the real plot is from within. He knows if we bathe him, we'll have nothing left to talk about. You can't argue with that. You stroll through the library. where a dusty volume titled The Secret Language of Sense rests open on a desk. Someone has scribbled notes in the margins. Leonda equals betrayal. Rosemary equals memory, but also surveillance. Clove equals Spanish loyalty. Maybe. You blink. Apparently, the king isn't the only one suspicious of fragrance. By late afternoon, a new kind of hush falls over the palace. Philip has ordered that all floral arrangements be removed. The basil in the kitchen gardens is to be cut back. The orange trees in the courtyard are now off limits. Even the soap in the servants' quarter scented or notice being inspected. The court pretends this is normal. The courtiers adjust their routines. Ministers wear wool gloves to avoid being smelled. Dignitaries are warned not to wear cologne. The kitchens are instructed to burn rosemary before meals to neutralize intentions. You follow the daily rhythm. Slower now, heavier, and then something truly unexpected. The king smiles, only briefly, only faintly. But it happens. He's watching Matteo roll on the ground outside the chapel. The dog finds a patch of sunlight, flops over, and groans with satisfaction. The king leans against the stone archway, arms crossed, and for just a moment, his face softens. Animals are honest, he mutters. They don't hide their scent. You sit beside him. You almost agree. Maybe his refusal to bathe isn't fear. Maybe it's a commitment to authenticity. Or maybe he just doesn't like change. Historians still debate the deeper cause of his soap aversion. Was it ritual? Was it rooted in childhood trauma? A defiance of foreign influence? Or just the slippery logic of a brilliant but exhausted mind? You'll never know for sure. But tonight, as the torches flicker and the corridors grow hushed again, you walk beside the king. Silent as always. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to, because his scent says it all. I am the king. I do not bathe, and I will outlast your perfume. The air in the palace is strangely festive this morning. Well, festive in the way only 18th century Spanish royalty can manage. The servants are whispering slightly louder than usual, and a footman just smiled, which may or may not be grounds for dismissal. A diplomat is arriving from the British court. Rumor has it he's bringing exotic teas and a map of the Caribbean drawn entirely in blue ink. There's also a rumor he bathes twice a week. This last detail has everyone on edge. You're leaning against a silk-lined wall near the grand staircase when the preparations begin. A small army of footmen dusts statues that haven't been acknowledged in decades. A maid tucks sprigs of rosemary into the folds of the curtains, fragrant but discreet. And someone even dares to light a citrus candle, then immediately blows it out when a scribe coughs dramatically. The diplomat arrives an hour later. Tall, powdered, polite. He bows so deeply his wig slides forward, revealing a strip of pink scalp. He smells, undeniably, of lavender water and polite imperialism. And here comes the test. Philip V, robe unwashed, collar wilted, but posture entirely unbothered, meets him in the Hall of Echoes. They sit. The air thickens. The diplomat clears his throat. The king closes his eyes. I assume, Philip murmurs, you've come clean. The diplomat hesitates. I beg your pardon? You've come clean. The king repeats. Too clean. It's offensive. The silence is immediate and absolute. Somewhere, a page drops a feather quill. You watch the diplomat's ears turn red. I assure your majesty I carry no hygienic threats. Philip leans forward. Clean men lie. But a man with a little dust on his collar? You can trust him. Dust has no agenda. The diplomat nods, sweating through his cravat. I shall endeavor to acquire some dust. Immediately. And just like that, the tension eases. Because no matter how surreal, when the king speaks, the world adapts. After the meeting, the diplomat is quietly given a wool coat to rub in the garden before his next appearance. Meanwhile, you stroll through the royal pet quarters. Yes, there is such a place. It's located just past the music room and smells like hay, lavender, and high expectations. You've come here because oddly enough the palace animals are cleaner than their human counterparts. You meet a falcon named Ignacio, who has his own perch carved from ivory and gets his feathers dusted twice a week with a special blend of crushed sage and rice flour. There's also a monkey named Frasquelo, who wears miniature waistcoats and has been trained to bow on command. He refuses to do so unless rewarded with candied chestnuts. But the true star? Mateo, the king's dog. You find him sprawled on a cushion near the fireplace, being brushed meticulously by a servant who looks like he's been doing this job since the Visigoths. His Majesty insists, the man says. The dog must be fragrant. The king, not so much. Indeed, Mateo is gently perfumed with chamomile oil and has his paws washed every other day in warm milk. It's the royal compromise. A clean companion who can absorb the attention, affection, and sometimes the scent. Displacement. And the king adores him. You recall one occasion, now told in hushed tones by the guards, when Mateo rolled in something questionable near the stables. The king not only forgave him, he demanded to be moved to the stables, claiming the air was more honest there. He stayed 3 days. During those days, courtiers were seen sprinkling dried thyme into haystacks and burning sage in horse stalls. It became known as the honest air incident. You leave the pet quarters and wander into the dressing room, where the queen's old attendants have laid out once again a full bathing suite. A basin of warm water, fresh linens, a robe with gold embroidery that sparkles faintly in the sun. They won't be used, but they remain. Every day, without fail. Like a prayer, you catch a glimpse of the palace logbooks. One entry simply reads, Day 201 of non-bathing. Spirits stable. Slight musings about starfish. You pose. Starfish? You follow the thread. That afternoon, Philip receives a box from the Costa gift from a governor trying to curry favor. Inside, dried sea creatures, including one rather impressive starfish. Philip lifts it with delicate fingers. They do not wash, and yet they survive, he says. Then he holds it aloft like a papal relic. The courtiers nod solemnly. A new emblem is born. The next morning, a small painting appears in the antechamber, Saint Starfish of the Unscrubbed. You're not sure who painted it. You're afraid to ask. Later, you overhear a conversation in the kitchen. Do you think the king actually believes soap is dangerous? A footman asks. No, a maid replies. I think he believes everything is dangerous. Soap just smells louder. That's the thing. In an age of plague, war, and political chaos, something as simple as bathing might feel threatening. It requires exposure, vulnerability, softness, and for a man raised on protocol and paranoia, vulnerability feels a lot like danger. Historians still argue whether the king's refusal to bathe was superstition, madness, or metaphor. Maybe it was all three, or maybe it was something simpler. A quiet rebellion in a world that demanded polished appearances. After all, if everyone expects a king to smell like myrrh and cleanliness, what power does he wield when he smells like defiance? Night falls softly again. The palace sleeps. You pass by the music room. The harpsichord plays itself well, almost. A sleepy servant sits hunched over it, coaxing soft notes into the air. The king listens from a shadowed corner, humming, robe loose, eyes half-lidded. The dog sleeps on his feet. The scent of chamomile mixes with old parchment and something herbal from the hall. You exhale, and once again, in the strangest way, you feel clean. The morning begins. Not with light, but with bells. Soft, distant, and slightly out of sync, just the way the king prefers them. You've grown used to their oddly delayed rhythm. One bell echoes from the north tower, another from the palace courtyard, and somewhere faintly a cowbell jingles. That last one is attached to a goat belonging to a court musician. Don't ask. You drift through the halls toward the great ballroom, where a minor celebration is underway. Minor in the sense that only 17 nobles were invited, and 12 actually showed up. It's someone's name day, possibly the duke's, possibly a saint's, maybe even the king's, depending on how one interprets the lunar calendar. The room is filled with muted laughter, fanning, and discreet sipping of warm wine. And, of course, fashion, which brings us to the real show. Court attire. You've never seen such ruffles. A marquis is wearing a collar so large it could serve as a sail. A duchess glides past, with embroidered peacocks on her sleeves. Everywhere you look, there's silk, brocade, gold thread, and laciso. Much lace. It's practically a currency. And standing at the center of it all, King Philip V. He has not bathed, but he is dressed. Today's robe is a deep burgundy, trimmed with silver. His wig is cetraflea. His slippers appear to match. And around his neck is a faintly stained cravat that somehow still carries an air of dignity. No one comments on the smell. No one ever does. Instead, they bow, smile, compliment his taste in ribbon. Because in this court, elegance is not about cleanliness. It's about control. You settle near a tall window, watching the flow of powdered nobles as they circle the room like slow-moving satellites. The king moves too, gliding from group to group, saying little, nodding often. He smiles once when someone praises a musical passage he hummed 3 weeks ago. He frowns when offered a glass of citrus cordial. He declines with a murmur, "Too sharp." It bites. That phrase alone becomes a whispered punchline across 3 salons. You trail him to the buffet, table lavishly set, as usual. There's pheasant, sugared almonds, roast pears, and a cheese wheel so large it requires its own footman. Philip takes none of it. He lifts the lid on a tureen of warm milk, nods once, and moves on. You hear a courtier behind you whisper, "He eats through music, not the mouth." You're not entirely sure what that means, but here it feels profound, fashionably foul indeed, because this is what defines court life under King Philip the Grandeur without grooming. The perfumes are thick. The powder is heavy. The layers of silk and velvet are like armor. Everyone sparkles, from the neck down, and beneath all of it, well, you know the truth. They are all complicit in the fiction, not just in Philip's refusal to bathe, but in the performance of normalcy. Take the Minister of the Interior. His wig is enormous, but his hands tremble whenever the king enters the room. He once confessed loudly and without provocation that he hadn't smelled anything in 5 years. No one believed him. Or the Countess of Segovia, who carries a scented handkerchief stitched with violets. She dabs it against her lips when the king speaks, and once tried to trade it for a bowl of dried rose petals from the queen's old chambers. The petals, by the way, are rumored to have absorbed 10 years of royal melancholy. You walk past a group of young courtiers gossiping about the latest edict. "It's not that strange," one says. "He just doesn't like water. Plenty of people don't." Another replies, "Yes, but most of them aren't running an empire." They laugh quietly, then straighten up as the king passes. He doesn't acknowledge them, but his robe does. It swishes with enough gravitas to dismiss a rebellion. Later, you visit the royal tailor's workshop tucked away behind the kitchens, past a hallway lined with statues of saints who all seem mildly disappointed. The tailor, Master Tomas, is mending a sleeve. Velvet doesn't breathe, he says without looking up. Doesn't it? You reply. Not when it's afraid. You blink. He sets down his needle. We make His Majesty's robes with extra weight. He likes to feel the gravity of his station. You nod slowly. The gravity is considerable. And the scent? You ask. He smiles, a little sad. Velvet absorbs everything. Memory. Power. Regret. Lavender too. When it's still fresh. You glance around. Dozens of robes hang in neat rows, some worn, some untouched, all perfectly clean. And none of them matter, because the king wears what he chooses, and he chooses what he trusts. Even if it's been worn 40 days and 40 nights. By mid-afternoon, the celebration winds down. The nobles scatter like powdered confetti, and the palace exhales. You find the king in the small music room again, fingers tapping rhythmically on the arm of a chaise. He's not humming today, just staring out the window, watching the clouds form strange shapes. They move like wigs, he says softly. The sky is powdered. You sit beside him, careful not to disturb the moment. Everything smells like ambition, he continues. Even the wind. Historians still debate whether statements like these were metaphorical genius or early warning signs. You decide they can be both. As the light fades, a servant enters with the evening robe, a slightly less rumpled version of the morning robe. The king considers it, then says simply, "Number, I'm not yet finished with this one." The robe stays. The scent deepens. The day ends as it began, elegant, eccentric, and unapologetically aromatic. And as you drift back into the quiet corridors of the palace, past the empty banquet hall, the resting dogs, and the faint smell of rosemary clinging to the walls, you realize something important. It's not that Philip refuses to change. It's that change, to him, smells suspicious. The palace chapel is unusually crowded today. Not with people, but with smells. Incense curls in slow, spiraling waves. Someone's been heavy-handed with the frankincense again. A tray of beeswax candles smolders near the altar. Behind the organ, you spot a cluster of monks gently waving sprigs of thyme as if conducting a botanical symphony. The air is thick, sweet, and oddly damp. And in the center of it all, Philip V, kneeling with the poise of a man who believes silence might be the only thing still on his side. He's dressed in somber purple, today's penitential robe, which, as you've come to expect, has been worn so many times, it looks like it carries its own memories. His hair peeks from beneath his cap, stubbornly uncombed. And his scent, at this point, has transcended smell. It's now a concept, a soft fog of identity. The Mass begins. Philip doesn't blink. The priest clears his throat, launches into Latin. The courtiers murmur. But the real ceremony is what happens afterward. As the final blessing echoes down the stone walls, a young monk steps forward, holding a small copper bowl of holy water. And suddenly, time freezes. The king does not move. Everyone knows this moment is risky. You hold your breath as the monk reaches out, hand trembling. A flick, just one drop, aimed gently at the king's boots. Philip opens his eyes. Careful, he says quietly. Blessings are meant for the soul, not the skin. The monk bows, steps back. The bowl is removed. The holy water incident, as it will later be known among the staff, becomes yet another reminder that even spiritual moisture is a bridge too far. You wander with the king afterward, as he makes his slow exit down the chapel hall. He walks past the reliquary's crystal boxes filled with bones, bits of cloth, and other relics of saints. He stops before one containing a shriveled finger wrapped in gold thread. She bathed daily. He whispers. You're not sure if he's referring to the saint or the servant polishing the reliquary. Either way, he looks away quickly, as if ashamed to even consider it. You follow him back through the hall, past tapestries stitched with martyrs and angels, all improbably spotless. Then into the open air of the cloister, where rosemary grows between the stones and pigeons coo like sleepy bells. Here, he breathes easier. He sits by the fountain. Yes, that fountain, the one that hasn't held water in years. Dry as a sermon, rimmed with moss. It's said the king ordered it drained after claiming the sound of running water whispered secrets from France. They send messages in the splash, he insisted. I won't be spied on by plumbing. Historians still argue whether this was political paranoia or simply the result of a year without real sleep. And the priests? They adjusted. Brager continued. Water did not. Later that afternoon, a Jesuit scholar arrives with a book. A treatise on the relationship between cleanliness and sainthood. He presents it with reverence. Pages of ornate script. Diagrams of early monastic bathing customs. Philip flips through it, then hands it back. I have known clean men who lie, he says, and saints who smelled like goats. The scholar bows, a little too fast. The king nods approvingly. You understand. That night, the palace hosts a small religious observance, part vigil, part social check-in. Candles everywhere. Chanting. Murmurs. And, of course, an overwhelming amount of blessed water. Bowls sit on every surface. Sprigs of hyssop rest beside them. You watch as courtiers avoid them like they're traps. One noblewoman pretends to sneeze, then quickly sidesteps the water bowl with the grace of a ballerina. Another carefully tips his wineglass toward it, as if to suggest, I've already got my share of holiness. Thanks. You find yourself wondering, when did water become the villain? Once, this court had Turkish baths. Once, kings soaked in goat's milk. Once, Spain prided itself on its fountains. Now they crack in the sun, because of a single man's aversion. You return to Philip's chambers later. He's reading. Well, not really. He's holding a book, turning the pages slowly, letting the smell of aged parchment settle in the air. He turns to Matteo. This one doesn't lecture, he says. The dog yawns. You look at the book's title, The Flowering of the Monastic Mind. He nods toward it. They bathed with snow, he mutters. Very clever, very temporary. You sit quietly, letting his words drift over you like dust. Not snow, dust. Because in this kingdom, dust is safer than water. In fact, there's a rumor among the kitchen staff that the king once requested his vegetables be dusted rather than rinsed. Whether true or not, they comply. Carrots arrive, with their soil intact. Lettuce gets gently brushed with linen. One chef has taken to air washing the meat. It's more philosophical than hygienic, he says, like breathing near it instead of washing it. You don't even question this anymore. Not here. And when a court painter unveils a portrait that subtly omits the bathhouse behind the king's chamber, no one complains. The omission makes it more accurate. Because yes, the bathhouse exists. Yes, it's still cleaned. But it hasn't seen water since the king's coronation. A courtier once opened its door, only to find a thin layer of dust perfectly undisturbed, like a forgotten desert temple. Inside, the tub gleamed. Marble, imported. Worth a fortune. Never used. A museum to lost expectations. One whisper called it Spain's driest relic. You believe it. Back in the chapel corridor, the holy water bowls remain, untouched, still, reflecting only candlelight and cautious glances. And as night settles across the court again, wrapping the tapestries in shadow, the candles in flicker, and the king in his ever-faithful robe, you realize something deeper than any pool. He has redefined sanctity, not through washing, but through withholding. He's not just avoiding the water. He's controlling it. And in that strange act of omission, he's found peace. Maybe even a kind of divinity. Dawn tiptoes into the palace, not with blazing sunlight or a fanfare of birdsong, but with the soft, rhythmic clatter of hooves. Today, the king is going riding. Yes, riding. He still does that sometimes. You follow a cluster of sleepy servants as they shuffle down to the stables, leading the royal horsey proud Andalusian named Florencio into the courtyard. The groom whispers that the horse gets groomed more than the king does. No one laughs. It's just true. Florencio's mane is brushed to perfection. His hooves are oiled and buffed. His saddle bears the royal crest, embossed in leather polished so thoroughly that it reflects the stone arches of the stables like a mirror. And then comes Philip. He emerges from the shadowed doorway, trailing a robe of brown velvet that could double as a carpet. His boots creak slightly old leather, worn thin. His eyes scan the sky, as if asking permission from the clouds. A valet offers a lavender-scented cloth to wipe his gloves. Philip pauses, takes it, sniffs once, then folds it into a perfect square and tucks it inside his boot, not to use just to store. For proximity, not purpose. He mounts Florencio slowly. Not with the practiced ease of a lifelong rider, but with the quiet uncertainty of a man trying to remember if gravity still functions the same today. And off they go. The king rides in silence, flanked by 2 guards and a priest who insists on reading aloud from the Psalms. No one listens. The hoofbeats drown everything. You follow, invisible as always, as they exit the gates and move along the palace orchard path. Orange trees line the way. Their blossoms have begun to fall soft white petals, carpeting the ground like fresh snow. And that's when it happens. The king stops, sniffs the air, frowns. There's too much bloom, he mutters. The priest glances up. God's perfume, your majesty. Philip grimaces. God should be less forward. It turns Florencio around. The ride is over. You drift behind them back into the palace, where the air is mercifully denser, more familiar, less alive. The incident prompts a new decree that very afternoon. No orange blossoms near the king's residence during spring. The gardeners look heartbroken. The oranges, presumably, do not care. You wander into the palace archive for a moment of quiet, where a clerk is cataloging incidents of scent-based disruption across the court's recent history. It's a surprisingly thick volume. You peek at the entries. Entry number 17. Diplomat's cologne results in 7-minute delay of state meeting. Entry number 42. Royal refusal to sign decree while wearing scented gloves. Entry number 53. Fragrant letter from Portuguese cousin burned immediately upon opening. The list goes on. You can't help but marvel at how deeply scent has come to define governance. And so you head to the Royal Council chamber. Today's meeting topic: grain storage and olfactory policy. Yes, those 2 things now go together. Apparently, one of the barns storing royal wheat was recently fumigated with dried lavender to deter pests. Unfortunately, the scent lingered on a sack that made its way into the palace kitchens. Philip noticed. He did not eat for 2 days. So today's task is simple. Remove all scented herbs from the grain supply. You sit beside a young noble scribbling notes furiously, trying to list safe smells. Hay is acceptable, he mutters. Dust. Faint stone. Possibly melted beeswax. A senior advisor leans over. Bread crust. Old linen. Mild incense only. It's a kind of game now. The king doesn't participate directly, but his presence hovers over the room like smoke, because everyone knows, if it smells too clean, it's probably cursed. After the meeting, you pass the sewing room, where a maid is carefully stitching sachets of mint to tuck inside the queen's old pillows. She doesn't know why she's still doing it. The queen's been gone for years, but the routine matters. One sachet accidentally lands near the king's window. He notices. There's a lyre in the breeze, he says. eyes closed. The sachet is removed. New questions asked. You find comfort in the absurd logic of it all. There's a predictability to the king's unpredictability. Take his bedtime rituals, for instance. Every evening, same robe. Same Songan unfinished melody he hums under his breath. Same dog curled by his feet. Same final inspection of the room, checking corners for intrusions, of sound, of scent, of invisible agents. He checks the fireplace to ensure it hasn't spoken since morning. He checks the basin to ensure it remains dry. He checks the mirror to ensure it has not aged faster than he has. Then he sleeps. And yes, she still smells like everything he has ever worn. Everything he has ever felt. Maybe even everything he's ever feared. But it doesn't bother him. And tonight, as you stand in the shadows watching the flickering candlelight slide across his cheek, you realize why. Because to bathe would be to start over. To remove not just dirt, but history. And Philip doesn't want to be clean. He wants to be constant. So he holds on to every thread, every stain, every scent that makes him feel real, even if it makes everyone else hold their breath. Tonight, a soft wind moves through the halls. Not the dramatic kind that slams doors and howls at tapestries, but a shy, almost apologetic breeze that slips through the stone arches, nudging dust motes like tiny dancers in the moonlight. You're standing in the palace's long-forgotten bathhouse. And yes, it still exists. Far from the royal chambers, tucked behind the old servants' wing, and guarded by nothing but silence, lies an architectural ghost room designed for cleansing that has never been used for it. You press your hand to the door. It creaks. Of course it does. Inside, the marble gleams. It should be damp. But it isn't. It's dry as a scroll. The great tub, carved from white stone veined with gray, sits perfectly empty. Its brass taps, once meant to flow with warm water and floral oils, are sealed shut. Not by rust or disrepair, but by royal command. Above, the ceiling is painted with clouds. Not dramatic heavens, just pale, idle swirls. You wonder if even the painter knew this room would be more myth than reality. There are towels stacked neatly on a shelf untouched. They still smell faintly of cedar. One is embroidered with a tiny crown. There's a robe, too. Not the kind Philip wears now, but the soft cotton kind meant for post-bathing dignity. You pick it up. It crackles. It has never been unfolded. And as you stand there in this monument to what never happened, you realize this is a kingdom of omission. A place built just as much around what is not done as what is. You sit on the edge of the dry tub, close your eyes. You can almost imagine it. The sound of warm water pouring. The sigh of skin meeting heat. The scrape of soap across a royal back. A moment of vulnerability. But no, that is not this king's path. He passed by this room every day for years and never entered. Not once. The servants still clean it. Weekly, ritualistically. They dust the corners, polish the taps, shake out the towels. But they do it silently, as though maintaining a shrine. One of them once joked, "If His Majesty ever stepped in here, the walls would faint." You rise, gently letting the robe fall back into place. You step back into the hall, where the air once again smells like beeswax, faint sweat, and velvet that's been warmed by centuries of sighing. Back to the royal apartment. Philip is standing by the mirror. Not looking into it, just standing near it. As though proximity alone could grant answers. He lifts a brush, runs it once through his beard, puts it down, then turns to a valet. "I dreamed of water," he says quietly. The room stills. The valet, trained in patience, says nothing. Philip continues. "It tried to tell me something, but I couldn't hear it under the ripples." He walks to the window. You follow. stepping over a pile of unread letters. Some of them are from his sons, some from foreign monarchs, some from no one at all. He opens the window slightly. A rare gesture. The night air trickles in. I remember once, he says, almost to himself. My mother scrubbed my feet. I was very small. It hurt. The bristles. I cried. You wait. That's all he offers. But it's more than usual. It's not just superstition, or power, or even eccentricity. There's memory here. Memory, tangled up with fear. The idea of cleansing true, complete cleansing means revisiting every part of the body, even the hidden ones, especially those. And for a man like Philip, whose thoughts race faster than horses and who finds betrayal in orange blossoms and conspiracy in rain, perhaps it's safer to never start down that path. Because where does it end? What if, in scrubbing away the dirt, you scrub away yourself? You drift out of the room as a new aide arrives, arms full of scrolls, trade agreements probably, grain tallies, maybe a letter from Naples asking if the king might, perhaps, consider a light rinsing in honor of an upcoming treaty. Have won't. Not this year. Not next. Back in the court corridors, you hear laughter. Two young noblemen play cards near a window. One fans himself with a letter from his aunt in Paris. She says her poodle gets rosewater baths twice a week. Poor beast, the other replies. Must smell like politics. They laugh. But it's a careful laugh, the kind you learn to use when your monarch might be listening through the walls. Further down, a maid sets fresh lavender near the queen's portrait. Not for the king. For herself. He'll smell it eventually, she whispers. Everything does. You find yourself near the kitchens. It's warm here. Comforting. The cook is experimenting with dry steamed vegetables, a technique invented to accommodate the king's dislike of condensation. He claims the flavor is more honest. You try a sliver of carrot. It tastes like a secret. You return to the garden courtyard as the sun rises. The blossoms have been trimmed back. The air is sharp but clear, and through a high window, you see the king once again standing, still, watching. Not you, not the staff, not even the dog, just the world, and maybe waiting for it to change before he ever will. Mid-morning arrives, wrapped in sunlight and secrets. The palace is unusually quiet, not solemn, not tense, just holding its breath. You're in the scriptorium now, a vaulted room tucked away behind the library, where royal scribes spend their days transcribing letters, copying laws, and, when the king's not looking, doodling miniature hedgehogs in the margins of military orders. But today, they're working on something more delicate, a fragrance register. It's not official, nothing is, when it concerns the king's aversions. But the scribes are compiling an internal document known only as the Book of Acceptable Sense. One of them gestures you over. It's for training purposes, he says. New staff, foreign envoys, visiting clergy. We list what smells won't result in delays. You skim a page. Dusty parchment. Approved. Worn leather. Tolerated. Beeswax. Safe. Burnt sage. Situacional. Consult chapel. Rosewater. Absolutely not. Anything citrus. Banish the bearer. You raise an eyebrow. It's saved 3 careers already, the scribe mutters, adding a note beside mint that simply says, only in dreams. You chuckle. But it's a quiet chuckle. You've learned. Back upstairs, the king is seated beneath the mural of Saint Sebastian, the same one that occasionally wears lavender sachets like brooches of defiance. Today, the saint watches as Philip stares at a set of maps. Not military maps, these are olfactory schematics. A valet unrolls a parchment showing the palace layout, each room shaded with coded colors. Neutral, mildly scented, risky, forbidden. This room had nutmeg residue last Tuesday, the valet explains. Philip squints. Did anyone faint? No, your majesty. Then it wasn't real nutmeg. You step back, heart warm. It's so wonderfully absurd. The palace is now managed by scent as much as by schedules. Even the court calendar bears small symbols beside each Diane knows for neutral days, a flower for risky ones, a skull and teardrop for citrus anniversaries. You pass the music room, where a new harpist is rehearsing. She's been instructed to keep her strings unwaxed, lest the beeswax be too forward. The melody she plays is gentle, wandering, and surprisingly emotional. Philip listens through a cracked door, eyes shut, head tilted. She plays like someone who's never worn perfume, he whispers. It's the highest compliment available. You walk alongside him later as he strolls the inner cloister, slow steps echoing under the arches. Matteo follows at a dignified distance. Occasionally the king pauses to touch the stone columns, as though checking their pulse. They remember, he says. Who? You wonder aloud. The walls. They absorb things. The air forgets. But the stone remembers. You touch the column too. It's cold. You pass a tapestry showing King Ferdinand mounted on horseback. It's been rehung slightly askew, just the way Philip likes it. He claims it keeps the light from settling too proudly on the silk. Your path takes you past an ambassador's waiting chamber, where a Venetian envoy sits sweating beneath a fan. I washed before I came, he whispers to the guard. Unwise, the guard replies. I thought it polite, only if you're planning to surrender. The door opens. The envoy walks in. 10 minutes later, he walks out, looking pale, but unharmed. I complimented the floor tiles, he says to no one in particular. I think I passed. In truth, Philip barely looked up from his chair. Just murmured, soap does not equal sincerity, and waved a hand. It's one of his more lucid days. By mid-afternoon, the king is back in the portrait gallery, wandering past his ancestors. You watch him pause before a painting of Charles VIII, famously unfortunate Habsburg monarch, whose jaw was so distorted that he reportedly could not chew food or speak clearly. Philip gazes at the portrait a long while. He never bathed either, he mutters. Really? You think? That's debated. But let's not ruin it. He moves on, passing portraits of clean-shaven kings, heavily bearded ones, and a queen who reportedly bathed twice a year and lived to be 90. Philip sighs. Too much water rots the will, he says to no one. You head back to the royal dressing room as servants prepare for supper. Not that the king will eat with others, she prefers solitude, but the performance matters. One servant sets the table with pristine linen. Another places a plate of bread unbuttered, unscented. A third tucks a sachet of dried moss beneath the cushion of the king's chair. You nod at her. She nods back. He finds it calming. Downstairs in the scullery, a different story unfolds. A fire has broken out not in the hearth, but in the pantry. It's small, contained, caused by a tipped lantern. But the panic? It's spectacular, because the flames lick the spice rack. And among the fallen jars, cinnamon, star anise, and a shattered bottle of rose oil. The head steward pales. That scented''ll carry up the vents. You all bolt. You race through the halls with the steward, the chef, a footman, and a surprisingly nimble monk, the scents already rising. You reach the king's chambers just as he's beginning to sniff the air suspiciously. He frowns, stands, and then says calmly, "Something elegant is dying." No one speaks. He walks to the window, breathes deeply, and murmurs, "I'll allow it. Just this once." Everyone exhales. It's a miracle. A scented pardon. A royal reprieve for Cinnamon's ghost. That night, the court tells the story in hushed tones. the day the king endured rose oil. You hear it repeated in the kitchen, the barracks, even by a lute player who turns it into a sad, slow tune called the Elegy of the Spices. But you, seated quietly beside the king's chair, watching him drift into the calm of candlelight, know the truth. He didn't accept the scent. He chose not to fight it. A rare gesture of mercy, to the court, to the air, maybe even to himself. The sun is slipping toward the western edge of the sky, and the palace turns amber and shadowed. The kind of light that makes silk shimmer like water and stone glow with memories. It's the golden hour, though, here. It feels more like tarnished gold, aged and slightly solemn, like a crown worn one day too long. The king is in his writing room. You've never been here before, not fully. Just glimpses through cracked doors, glimpses of parchment and sighs. But today, the door is open, and Philip is alone. He sits at a narrow desk beneath an arched window, quill in hand, but he hasn't written anything yet. Sheets of parchment lie before him, images curling like nervous fingertips. An ink pot rests beside a candlestick. A single book lies open nearby. On the hidden disorders of the soul, he taps the quill twice, doesn't dip it, then turns to the dog. "Mateo," he murmurs, "what do you think we smell like to angels?" The dog doesn't reply, but he lifts his head, ears twitching. Philip continues, "They say angels have no noses. Convenient." You sit down softly by the bookshelf, beneath a portrait of Queen Maria Luisa. She's painted with a gentle smile and a bouquet of lilies. You know from whispers that she wore perfumerial perfume, rose and amber and a bit of clove. The king once called her a walking cathedral. You watch him trace the edge of a page now, his fingers stained with old ink and the patina of years lived without washing them away. Then he begins to write. Just a few lines. Not an edict, not a law. Just something. The body is a house with no doors. The soul cannot leave without breaking the windows. I will not wash the windows. Let the dust speak for me. He stops, leans back, and for the first time in hours, closes his eyes. You step away, respectfully. Some moments don't want to be witnessed fully. You return to the corridor, where the final preparations for the evening's quiet supper are underway. No guests, no ministers, just the king, alone, as he prefers. The footman lights a candelabra and gently places a bowl of boiled chestnuts beside the fire, his favorite. In the hallway, a servant posts a small notice. All perfume is to be removed from the northern wing. The king dreams in unscented rooms. Below that, in smaller handwriting, "Please stop polishing the dog." You move into the gallery one last time, where portraits of monarchs past seem to lean closer as the night deepens. Some clean, some crumpled, some scowling beneath powdered brows, but none as singular as Philip V. You remember how it all began, how you arrived in this strange drifting court, expecting dust and giggles, maybe a few jokes about soap, but now you see it. This wasn't about hygiene. It never was. It was about something deeper. Control, fragility, ritual, memory, power. To bathe is to let something go, and Philip never lets go. He keeps everything. The smells, the moods, the clothes, the music, the regrets. He lives steeped in the tincture of himself. And though the world calls it madness, it is undeniably his. You pass a maid humming a lullaby, folding a robe that's never been worn. You smell chamomile. You see Mateo padding quietly past, a sachet of time tied to his collar like a knight's crest. And then, the king appears once more, standing at the top of the staircase, framed in candlelight, wrapped in a robe older than most nations. He says nothing, just looks out at his kingdom. Not the land, not the cities, but this palace, this scent-drenched sanctum where no water flows, and yet everything lives. You sit down on the final step, feeling the cool stone beneath you, and you listen to nothing, to everything, to the quiet breathing of a world that has learned to accept the man who never bathed. Now, everything is soft. The candles have burned low. The palace has gone still. You find yourself alone in the corridor outside the king's chamber, where velvet drapes whisper with each shift of air, and the distant tick of a forgotten clock keeps time with your heartbeat. There's no more story to tell tonight. Only the scent of old wood, worn parchment, and wool that has soaked up centuries of dreaming. The king is asleep. The dog is curled at his feet, and outside, the stars hang low, like pearls left carelessly across a blanket of blue. You close your eyes. Feel the hush settle into your bones. Let your thoughts drift, untethered, like feathers in candlelight. Maybe you still carry the echo of the king's strange, stubborn melody. Maybe you understand now that even those who seem lost are merely navigating by different stars. And maybe, just maybe, you too can rest in the warmth of your own rituals, your own scent, your own silence. So breathe in, deep. Let the day melt away. No need to solve anything tonight. Let the world wait. You're exactly where you need to be, wrapped in quiet, floating in history, and slowly, so very slowly, drifting into dreams.